Under the dim light, I stood frozen, my body trembling as Ryan, my husband, demanded that I sell my $7 million inheritance. His cold, harsh voice sliced through the silence like a knife. "You have no choice, Laura," he hissed, his eyes narrowing with frustration. His frustration quickly turned into rage. Before I could say a word, he grabbed a wooden stick from the wall and struck me hard across the head. Pain shot through me like lightning, and then everything went dark. I fainted instantly. When I regained consciousness, the world felt upside down because it was. I was hanging from a tree, my arms and legs bound tightly with rough, coarse ropes. The pressure on my pregnant belly was unbearable, and every breath felt like a struggle for survival. Nearby, Ryan stood watching me, a cruel smirk spread across his face as he observed my struggle. He wasn't waiting to help me, he was waiting for me to give in. "My name is Laura, and I'm 31 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, where I work as a graphic designer for a growing advertising agency. Life wasn't always like this. Just a year ago, I thought I was living a dream. I married Ryan, a 35-year-old entrepreneur who seemed like the perfect partner. He was charming, ambitious, and supportive. He celebrated every achievement in my career and spoke passionately about building a wonderful future together. Things started to change after I inherited my late grandfather's estate, a property worth $7 million. It was more than just valuable land, it was part of my family's legacy passed down through generations. I always imagined it as something I would keep safe for my children. At first, Ryan seemed thrilled for me. He praised my family's accomplishments and spoke about how we could preserve its significance. But over time, his excitement turned into something darker, an obsession. He started bringing up the property in conversations, at first casually. "We could do so much with the money from selling it," he said one day, his tone light. "Just imagine what we could achieve." I didn't think much of it then, brushing it off as him sharing ideas. But gradually, his suggestions became more persistent. He started talking about selling the property like it was the only logical thing to do. At first, he framed it as a way to secure bigger dreams for our family, but something about the way he spoke made me uneasy. It didn't feel like he cared about the family or the legacy, it felt like he cared about the money. Even as his comments grew more insistent, I held my ground. That property wasn't just about wealth to me, it was a symbol of my family's history, their struggles, and their achievements. I couldn't bear the thought of letting it go. Every time Ryan brought it up, I reminded him of this, hoping he would understand, but he didn't. His tone became sharper, and the conversations turned into arguments. The man I had once trusted and loved was changing before my eyes. The supportive partner, who used to encourage my independence, now belittled me for holding on to something I valued. His sweet words were replaced with accusations and manipulation. "Selling the property is the smart thing to do, Laura," he would say, his impatience barely concealed. "You're being stubborn for no reason." I stood my ground. "I've told you before, Ryan. That property is more than just money to me. It's a part of my family's history, and I won't sell it." His frustration started bleeding into every part of our relationship. The man who once praised my decisions now dismissed them entirely. He started accusing me of being selfish, claiming I didn't care about our future. I didn't recognize this version of him, the cold, manipulative stranger who had replaced my loving husband. One evening during dinner, everything came to a head. We were seated at the table, the usual tension thick between us. Ryan brought up the property again, his tone firm and unyielding. "We need to sell it, Laura," he said, swirling his glass of wine in his hand. "You're irresponsible." I set my fork down, staring him directly in the eyes. "No, Ryan, we discussed this before. I'm not selling it." His jaw clenched tightly, and his voice grew sharper. "You're being unreasonable, Laura. This is about us, about our family." Why can't you see that? This isn't just about us, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That property is for our child's future. I won't let you take that away. His face darkened with anger. He slammed his hand on the table, the sudden noise making me flinch. You think you can make all the decisions, don't you? Do you even care about me? I took a deep breath, holding back tears. Of course I care about you, Ryan, but I won't be bullied into doing something I don't believe in. He stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. His eyes burned with fury as he spat. You'll regret this. He stormed out of the room, leaving me sitting there, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time, I felt a chill of real fear creep into my mind. The man I thought I knew was gone, and in his place was someone who was willing to destroy everything I held dear. The man I once loved and trusted had vanished, replaced by someone dangerous. Something dark simmered beneath Ryan's surface, and the tension between us only grew worse in the following days. He became colder, more distant, and far less subtle about his manipulation. His words turned into open hostility, and every conversation led back to the same demand, selling the property. Each time I refused, his tone grew harsher, his frustration more evident. One night, everything spiraled out of control. Ryan came home late, his mood already sour. I was sitting in the living room, trying to avoid yet another argument, but I could tell it was unavoidable. He stood in the doorway, his eyes sharp and angry. We need to talk, he said, his voice firm and demanding. I let out a deep sigh, bracing myself for what I knew was coming. Ryan, if this is about the property again. It is, he interrupted, cutting me off sharply. His voice was cold and unrelenting. I'm done asking nicely. You're going to sell it? No, I replied, standing my ground. I've told you before, Ryan, that property isn't for sale, and I won't repeat myself. His face twisted with rage as he stormed across the room. His fists were clenched tightly at his sides, and his voice grew louder with every word. You think you can just ignore me? You think this is all about you? His anger spilled out uncontrollably, filling the room with tension. Ryan, calm down, I said, taking a step back. This isn't the way to handle things. Before I could finish, he grabbed a wooden stick leaning against the wall. His eyes burned with fury as he raised it high. You'll learn to listen, he growled. The blow came down hard on my head, and pain shot through my skull like lightning. My vision blurred, and I stumbled backward before collapsing to the floor. Everything around me faded to black. When I woke up, nothing felt real. My arms and legs were tightly bound with rough ropes, and I was hanging from a tree. The ropes dug into my skin, and the weight pressed painfully against my pregnant belly. Fear rushed through me as I realized Ryan was standing nearby, watching me with a cruel smirk. Now, he said mockingly, are you ready to sell the property, or do you need more convincing? Terror gripped me, but I knew I had to stay strong, for myself and for my baby. The ropes burned my skin with every slight movement, and my body hung awkwardly, the pressure on my belly making it hard to breathe. My heart raced as I struggled to take shallow breaths. Ryan loomed nearby, leaning casually against the tree trunk as if he wasn't tormenting me. Still think you're in charge, Laura, he sneered. You've got two options: agree to sell the property or stay there until you change your mind. His words felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last I fought. Back tears, knowing my weakness would only satisfy him. Ryan, please, I begged, my voice trembling. Think about her, baby. You don't have to do this. He stepped closer, his face twisted with anger and disgust. Our baby, he spat. Don't try to guilt me. Laura, you're the one who pushed me to this. You could end this right now. Just sell the property. The cold indifference In his voice terrified me, but I refused to let him see my fear. I glanced down at my wrists, noticing that the knot wasn't as tight as it seemed. A flicker of hope sparked inside me, but I knew I had to be careful. Any sudden movement could catch his attention. Ryan turned away, muttering angrily to himself about how stubborn I was. I used the moment to start twisting my wrists, ignoring the way the rope scraped and burned my skin. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the knot. Every tiny movement brought me closer to freedom. Don't even think about trying anything, Ryan snapped suddenly, though his back was still turned. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't stop. With one final desperate pull, my hands came free. My wrists throbbed with pain, but I didn't care. I quickly untied the ropes around my ankle and legs and lowered myself to the ground as quietly as I could. Ryan turned around just as I bolted into the darkness of the woods. His furious shouts echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. Survival was all that mattered now for me and my baby. The cold night air stung my face as I ran through the dense forest, branches scratching at my arms and legs. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest, and every step felt like a battle against fear and exhaustion. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. Ryan's angry voice faded into the distance, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't risk him catching up to me. Each breath I took was shallow and quick, my body fueled by pure adrenaline. The pain in my head throbbed with every heartbeat, but I pushed it aside. The only thing that mattered was escaping. My baby's life and mine depended on it. Adrenaline surged through my veins, pushing me forward despite this searing pain in my body. Behind me, Ryan's furious shouts echoed through the night. "Laura, you can't get away from me," he bellowed, his voice dripping with rage. I didn't dare glance back. My only focus was to get as far away from him as possible. The woods were pitch black, the uneven ground threatening to trip me. With every step, each stumble sent sharp jolts through my pregnant belly, but I couldn't stop. My baby's life and mine depended on her escaping. Ryan's footsteps crashed through the brush, drawing closer. His voice sliced through the darkness like a predator stalking its prey. "You think you're smart? You'll regret this, Laura," he snarled. I ducked behind a large tree, crouching low as I tried to catch my breath. My hands shook as I pressed them against the rough bark, my heart pounding in my ears. I prayed Ryan wouldn't find me. His heavy steps slowed, and I heard him muttering angry curses. "Ces," as he searched. I bit my lip to keep silent, every fiber of my being focused on staying still. When his footsteps moved farther away, I seized the opportunity, summoning what strength I had left. I bolted again, my legs burned with exhaustion, but a faint glow ahead gave me hope. It was a road. The thought of safety pushed me through the last tangle of branches. I stumbled onto the asphalt, the cool surface harsh against my bare feet. In the distance, headlights approached. I waved my arms desperately, stepping into the car's path. The vehicle screeched to a halt, and the driver, an older man with kind eyes, jumped out. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern as he looked me over. Tears streamed down my face. "My husband," I gasped, barely able to get the words out. "He tried to kill me." Without hesitation, the man helped me into his car. "You're safe now," he assured me, his voice steady. He drove quickly toward the nearest police station, the hum of the engine comforting in the silence. For the first time in hours, I felt a glimmer of safety. But deep down I knew this nightmare Wasn't over. Ryan had to be stopped. He had to face justice at the police station. I sat in a small room trembling as I clutched a blanket someone had draped over my shoulders. Officers surrounded me, listening intently as I recounted everything: Ryan's obsession with the property, his violent attack, and my desperate escape through the woods. Each word felt like I was reliving the horror, but I knew I had to be strong. My husband tied me to a tree, I said, my voice cracking as the weight of my words hit me. He threatened me, told me I had to sell the property. When I refused, he hit me. He didn't care about me or our baby. My hands shook as I described the brutality. The officer across from me nodded solemnly, his pen flying across the notepad. We'll handle this. You're safe now. Let's get you to a doctor to make sure you and your baby are okay. The man who rescued me, Henry, stayed long enough to give a statement. She was terrified, he told the officers. Bruised, blooded, and desperate. No one fakes that kind of fear at the hospital. Doctors examined me carefully. They confirmed that my baby was unharmed. Despite everything, though I had a mild concussion and severe bruising, their reassurances brought a wave of relief. But my stomach still churned with the thought of Ryan's actions. How could someone I once loved have done this to me? Back at the police station, the investigation moved quickly. Officers gathered evidence from our home: the wooden stick Ryan had used, the ropes he had tied me with, and photos of the tree where I had been suspended. Henry's testimony, combined with my injuries, painted a horrifyingly clear picture of what had happened. Ryan was arrested the next morning. He claimed innocence, twisting the story to make himself look like the victim, but his lies fell apart under scrutiny. The evidence was undeniable. When my father arrived from New York, his presence brought a surge of strength I hadn't realized I needed. Ryan had tried to take everything from me: my freedom, my future, and my child's safety. But he hadn't succeeded. I was determined to make sure he paid for what he had done. Justice was no longer just a hope. It was a promise. The day of the trial arrived, and I stood at the entrance to the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I spotted Ryan at the defendant's table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous tension. He avoided my gaze at first, but when his eyes flicked to me, I stared back unflinching. He needed to know that I wasn't afraid anymore. I took my seat on the witness stand, my hands trembling in my lap. The prosecutor, Miss Nicholas, stood to my left. Her expression was firm, her presence radiating strength and determination. Mrs. Richards, she began, turning to me, please tell the court what happened the night of the attack. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady. Ryan became obsessed with selling the property. I began feeling the flood of emotions rise, eyes, but refusing to let them overwhelm me. This was my moment to speak the truth for myself, for my child. When I spoke in the courtroom, my voice trembled, but I forced myself to keep going. I inherited the property from my grandfather, I said. When I refused to sell it, Ryan became aggressive. That night he hit me with a wooden stick and tied me up. He hung me from a tree and told me I'd regret it if I didn't sell. The room fell silent as my words hung in the air. I paused, looking down at my hands, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. Why did you refuse to sell the properties, Miss Nicholas? The prosecutor asked gently. I lifted my head, meeting her eyes with determination. It wasn't just land, it was my family's legacy. I explained. It was Meant for my child, I couldn't let him destroy that for his own selfish gain. Ryan's lawyer tried to undermine me, accusing me of being overly emotional and unreliable, but the evidence told the truth: the bruises on my arms, the knots, and the ropes, the photos of the tree where I was tied, all of it matched my account. The police corroborated everything, and Henry's testimony was undeniable. After hours of deliberation, the jury finally returned. I sat in the courtroom barely able to breathe as the door opened and the verdict was read. Guilty. Relief washed over me, lifting the heavy weight from my chest. Justice had been served. Ryan would no longer have any power over me. The judge's voice cut through the silence, firm and resolute. The defendant, Ryan Richards, is hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of early parole for assault, attempted coercion, and reckless endangerment. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The moment felt surreal, as the reality of Ryan's punishment sank in. This wasn't just about the pain he had caused me. It was about every moment he had stolen from me, the fear, the control, the manipulation. Ryan's face twisted in disbelief and anger as the verdict was announced. His confident facade had crumbled. His lawyer tried to argue for a lighter sentence, but the judge didn't waver. "Your actions were beyond cruel," the judge said. "You will pay for what you've done." I sat there still and quiet, processing the gravity of it all. This was it. The nightmare was finally over. My mind replayed everything that had led to this moment, from the first time Ryan pressured me to sell the property to the terror I felt when he attacked me. But now, for the first time, I could truly breathe. I was free. As the court session ended, my father approached me. He wrapped me in a tight embrace, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it, Laura. You stayed strong. He'll never hurt you again." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad," I whispered, clinging to him. Outside the courthouse, the weight I had been carrying for so long finally lifted. The sun seemed brighter, and the world felt quieter. Ryan was behind bars, and the life I had fought so hard for was within reach. There was still a long road ahead, healing from the trauma, rebuilding my life, and preparing for my child. But one thing was certain: I would never let fear control me again. I was free. The months that followed were a blur of adjustments and new beginnings. After the trial, I returned to my job as a graphic designer. My colleagues were understanding and supportive, which made a world of difference. Though the memories of what I had endured were still fresh, focusing on work helped me feel grounded again. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my life, what I had built, and what I wanted for my future. Ryan's threats and violence no longer loomed over me. The house we had shared felt cold and empty, a place I could never return to. It had been a prison, and I was determined to leave it behind. The property I inherited became a source of strength. What Ryan had once seen as a prize to exploit had transformed into a refuge for me. I started small projects on the land, turning it into something I had always dreamed of. Gardens blossomed, a small office took shape, and I began building a home, a place that would one day be a sanctuary for my child and me. In those quiet moments as I worked the land, I often thought about the future. I imagined my daughter growing up in a home filled with love and safety. I dreamed of a life full of hope and happiness, one where I was no longer shackled by fear or pain. This time, things would be different. I would protect what I had built, no matter what. The day my baby was born marked a turning point. Holding my newborn daughter in my arms, I felt a profound sense of purpose. Despite everything I had been through, I had made it. I had fought through the darkness, and come out stronger on the other side. My daughter would never know the fear I had lived with, and that promise fueled me in those early days of motherhood. I made a vow to myself: I would protect this family and this life with everything I had. We would thrive, and I would never again let anyone take my freedom or my future away. I was free. This story, at its heart, is about resilience, empowerment, and the pursuit of justice in the face of betrayal and violence. My journey from feeling trapped in a toxic marriage to reclaiming my life shows the strength that can emerge from even the darkest moments. Refusing to let fear control me was the most important decision I ever made. That strength, along with the support of my father and the truth coming to light, brought me to safety and justice. Ryan's actions didn't define me, my determination did. Even after the darkest times, it's possible to rebuild, to find strength, and to create a better future. I hope my story reminds anyone in a similar situation that no one has the right to harm or control you. There is always a path to safety, justice, and new beginnings.